I'm Alex, and my friend Mara and I never expected a quiet weekend in the countryside to turn into a nightmare. The storm rolled in faster than we could react, and by the first crack of thunder, we realized we weren't alone in the house. Something was waiting, watching, and it didn't want us to leave. The storm began quietly at first, a soft drizzle tapping against the windows, but it didn't take long before the rain turned into a relentless, pounding force. Each drop struck the roof like tiny hammers, the sound echoing through the old wooden house and making it groan under the pressure. I had always thought the house had character, the way it creaked and shifted with the wind, but tonight it felt different. It felt alive. The walls seemed to breathe, the floorboards shifted beneath my feet, as if the house were responding to the storm, adjusting itself around me. I could hear the wind weaving through the trees outside, bending the branches until they scraped against the windows, and every gust sounded almost like a voice, whispering something I couldn't quite understand. I tried to calm myself by scrolling through my phone, looking at messages and news, anything to distract me, but the battery was draining faster than normal, the screen flickering in the dim light, adding to the tension. Every flash of lightning illuminated the room in stark white, turning familiar furniture into strange, looming shapes. Shadows stretched and twisted across the walls, and for the first time, I realized that what I thought I knew about my home wasn't true. The shapes weren't behaving like they should. They moved slightly, just enough to make me doubt my own eyes. My heart pounded and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Then I saw it at the edge of the room, just past the doorway. A shadow lingered where nothing should have been. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the lightning, a shadow from the curtain rod or the uneven furniture. I focused on it, staring, willing it to disappear, but it didn't. It moved, just slightly, a subtle shift that sent a shiver down my spine. My rational mind screamed at me to ignore it, to tell myself it was nothing, but every instinct in my body was screaming danger. The storm was growing louder now, and the thunder wasn't just distant anymore. It rolled through the sky like a giant drum, shaking the walls, rattling the windows, making the house vibrate beneath me. Each clap felt like it was shaking the air itself, and I could feel my heartbeat syncing with it, faster, heavier, almost like I was part of the storm. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't run. I just stared, frozen, as the shadows seemed to stretch, elongating and shrinking in rhythm with the lightning flashes. My stomach turned, and I realized I wasn't breathing normally. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead, though the room was cold, and every nerve in my body was on edge. Then there was another one, another shadow, darker, moving just past the hallway. My blood ran cold. I hadn't seen it approach, hadn't heard it move, yet it was there, just at the corner of my vision. I forced my eyes toward it, and it vanished. I felt a panic rising, a sense of being watched from places that didn't exist. I backed away from the hallway, my hands trembling, and felt the floorboards creak unnaturally under my weight. The storm seemed to respond to me, louder now, more violent, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the noise outside wasn't just wind and rain. There were patterns to it, rhythms almost too deliberate, like the storm itself was alive and mocking me. A flash of lightning lit up the room, and for just a second, I saw something at the far wall. Something tall, featureless, looming over the furniture. It wasn't human, yet it mimicked the shapes of a person, leaning slightly forward as if studying me. I blinked, and it was gone. My pulse raced, and I felt my legs weaken. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the desk for support. Every logical part of my mind tried to insist I was imagining things, but every instinct screamed the opposite. Then I felt it a cold rush, like air leaving a freezer, brushing against the back of my neck. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. No one was there. The shadows were still moving, flickering at the edges of the candlelight, and I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just afraid of the storm anymore. I was afraid of what had arrived with it. And then I noticed it just as a bolt of lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the hallway in harsh white light. Two dark shapes, more distinct than before, stood there, just beyond the doorway, motionless, staring. And though they had no faces, I could feel their attention, the way they were watching me, waiting. I couldn't move. Every part of me wanted to flee, to escape the shadows that now seemed to breathe with the storm, but my legs refused to obey. I stayed frozen, my eyes locked on the doorway where the shapes had appeared. The lightning flashed again, casting everything into stark relief for just a second, and I could swear they were closer than before. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the storm, and I felt a cold sweat running down my back, soaking the collar of my shirt. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet I couldn't tear myself away. Something in the way they waited, silent, patient, almost knowing, held me in place. The wind rattled the windows, and the rain hit with a deafening force. I tried to focus on the sound of the storm, telling myself it was just noise, just nature, but the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't entirely natural. Beneath the thunder, beneath the howl of wind, there was a softer sound, almost deliberate, a scratching, slow and uneven, coming from somewhere above me. My stomach sank as I realized it was coming from the attic. The attic, empty since I moved in. No one could be up there. Yet the sound was real, claws or nails dragging across wood, moving deliberately, pacing. I couldn't stop my gaze from shifting to the ceiling. Every few seconds, lightning lit the room, and for a fraction of a second, I could make out the shadow of the attic door, the small hatch above the stairs, just a slit of darkness. The scratching grew louder, moving back and forth, and my pulse quickened with every scrape. My mind tried to rationalize it, but it's squirrels. No, it was heavier than that, deliberate. Something was alive up there, something that knew I was below. I tried to calm myself by taking deep breaths, but the air in the room felt thick, heavy, as if the storm itself had seeped inside. Each inhale tasted of damp wood and something metallic, like blood. My eyes darted around, scanning the room for anything I could use to protect myself. There was nothing, just furniture and shadows, twisting and writhing in the candlelight, stretching across the walls in shapes that defied explanation. I could feel them moving in the darkness, just out of reach, like tendrils curling around the edges of my vision. Then came the whispering. At first it was soft, almost drowned out by the storm. I strained to hear, my ears ringing with the wind. But I could make out syllables, words, though not the kind I understood. They were deliberate, like a language I didn't know. Yet my mind felt their meaning. Warnings, threats, commands. I couldn't respond, couldn't answer. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry, leaving me paralyzed with fear. Every part of my body screamed to flee, yet every instinct told me that moving would be worse, that leaving my spot would invite whatever it was to come closer. I forced myself to move, a single step toward the hallway, compelled by something I couldn't name. My feet creaked on the floorboards, loud in the storm's chaos, and I froze. The shadows at the edge of the room flickered violently. A shape darted fast, almost too fast to see, across the hallway. I didn't scream, though I wanted to. I could feel it, a presence, stalking me, circling, watching from the corners I couldn't see. My stomach knotted as I realized it wasn't just the storm, not just the house, it was here, in the same space as me, breathing the same air. I forced myself up the stairs to the attic, each step groaning beneath my weight, each one sounding louder than the thunder outside. The scratching had stopped, but the silence was worse. It pressed against me like a physical force, heavy and oppressive. I reached the hatch and shined my phone's flashlight inside. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the weak light, and at first I thought it was empty. Relief washed over me, weak and fleeting, until I saw the walls. They were scratched deep, jagged marks carved into the wood, fresh, wet. The smell hit me next. Iron, coppery, unmistakably blood. Then I saw it, in the far corner, a handprint, dark and glistening, pressed against the wall, as if someone or something had been there only moments ago. My heart seized and I stepped back, almost falling down the stairs. My mind screamed that it couldn't be real, that I was imagining it. But the smell, the marks, the wetness of the handprint, all told me otherwise. Something had been in my house. Something had been watching me, pacing above, waiting for the perfect moment, and I knew it wasn't gone. It was still there, just out of sight, just out of reach, observing, patient. The storm had reached a fever pitch, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. Every thunderclap shook the house, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. Rain lashed against the walls, and the wind whistled through the cracks, carrying with it an almost tangible sense of malice. The scratches in the attic haunted me. I couldn't stop picturing the handprint, fresh and dark, pressed into the wood. I wanted to leave, run as far away as possible, but my body refused to respond. It was like the storm had routed me to the spot, and whatever had been up there was patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I kept checking the hallway, scanning every shadow, but each glance only deepened my fear. The shadows seemed to move independently of the storm now, shifting in ways that made no sense, stretching and contorting as if they had a life of their own. I realized with a sinking feeling that they were closer than before, lingering at the corners of my vision, just beyond the reach of the candlelight. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong. It lagged slightly behind me, twitching in ways I didn't. Every time lightning flashed, I caught glimpses of something tall, thin shapes pressed against the walls, moving silently, watching. The whispers returned, low and sibilant, echoing from every wall, even the floor. They were words I couldn't understand, yet my mind felt their meaning: threats, warnings, promises of pain. I tried to cover my ears, to shut it out, but it was everywhere, vibrating through the walls, crawling under my skin. The storm outside became a backdrop, a chorus to the terror inside. I couldn't trust anything. The house, the shadows, even my own senses seemed to have turned against me. I forced myself to move, driven by a mix of fear and an irrational compulsion. My steps were slow, careful, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Each creak sounded like a gunshot in the silence, and I imagined the shadows reacting, ready to pounce. I climbed the stairs to the attic again, unable to resist the pull, though every instinct screamed at me to stay away. My flashlight flickered, weak in my hand, as I shone it toward the hatch. Dust hung in the air like frozen smoke, and I felt the oppressive presence of something just beyond the light. The attic appeared empty, at first glance. The scratches were still there, jagged and deep, but no shape moved. No figure lurked in the corners. I stepped closer, the floorboards groaning beneath me, and that's when I saw it, something dark, tall, and featureless, pressed into the far wall. It didn't move at first. I thought it was a shadow cast by the lightning, but then I realized it wasn't attached to anything, didn't obey the light. It was alive in a way shadows should not be. My breath caught and I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Then I noticed the walls. The scratches had multiplied, spreading like a living organism, twisting and curling across the wood in patterns that made no sense. They weren't just marks, they were deliberate, like writing, but I couldn't understand the language. The air was thick now, suffocating, carrying the scent of iron, copper, and something worse, something rotten and decayed. I gagged, stepping back, and that's when I realized the worst part. The handprint in the corner was gone. In its place was something else, an imprint of a face, pressed into the wood, featureless, but horrifyingly real. I stumbled back toward the stairs, my flashlight trembling in my grip. That's when I heard a soft scraping sound, closer than before, just above me. I froze, every nerve screaming. The attic hatch moved slightly, a whisper of motion, and my heart leapt into my throat. Something was pacing up there, waiting, watching, knowing I had seen it. I wanted to call out, to demand it show itself, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the storm, by the shadows, by the fear. The storm outside seemed to respond to my panic, shaking the house violently, as if it were alive and feeding on my terror. The shadows in the room twisted toward me, growing, stretching, and I realized with a cold dread that they were no longer confined to the edges of the room. They were moving closer, surrounding me in darkness and silence, and I understood, too late, that I wasn't alone. Then, just as a lightning flash illuminated the attic, I saw them, more eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly in the darkness, staring from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floorboards. They blinked in unison, fixed on me, waiting. And in that moment, I knew with a clarity that made my blood run cold. Whatever had been in my house wasn't just watching. It was learning, and it would not leave until it had claimed me. The storm had grown relentless, battering the house with a fury that seemed almost personal, almost alive. Each thunderclap shook the walls so violently that I feared they would splinter, and the rain pounded against the windows with the force of fists. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood, wet earth, and something metallic I couldn't name, a stench that made my stomach churn. I stayed huddled in the bedroom, surrounded by furniture I had pushed against the door, trying to block it, trying to feel some sense of security, but it was useless. I knew, deep down, that the barricade meant nothing. Whatever was in the house didn't need doors. Every flash of lightning revealed more than just the room. It revealed shapes moving just beyond my vision. Shadows stretched unnaturally, contorting across the walls, sometimes appearing to reach toward me. I could feel them, cold and patient, pressing in from all sides. My reflection in the cracked mirror across the room was no longer mine. It moved slightly behind me, lagging, twitching, grinning in ways my face could not. I tried to look away, to cover my eyes, but every instinct kept me staring, almost hypnotized by the impossible. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing in the room, as if the walls themselves were speaking. I couldn't understand the words, but their meaning was unmistakable: malice, hunger, intent. I felt it crawling over my skin, a presence that was both everywhere and nowhere. It was patient, studying me, waiting for me to break, and I was already breaking. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. The candlelight flickered, threatened to go out, and in those moments of darkness I felt the house itself breathe, exhale cold air directly onto my neck. I forced myself to stand, driven by fear and a strange compulsion I couldn't resist. Each step toward the hallway made the floorboards groan loudly, each sound magnified in the storm's chaos. I could feel the presence moving in tandem with me, circling, observing. The air was heavier now, almost viscous, pressing down on my chest and making it difficult to breathe. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, of smashing a window, of running into the storm, but every plan seemed futile. The house had trapped me, or maybe I had trapped myself. Then the lightning flashed, and I saw it. Standing just beyond the doorway, pressed against the far wall, was the tall, dark figure, featureless, impossible, yet unmistakably real. It didn't move, but I could feel it focusing entirely on me. I realized with horror that it wasn't alone. Shadows crowded the edges of the room, stretching and writhing, crawling up the walls in ways no living thing should. They were patient, deliberate, as if enjoying the torment, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stumbled back toward the bedroom, desperate to regain some sense of safety, but the shadows followed, closer than ever. Every movement they made seemed synchronized with the storm, rising and falling with the thunder, stretching with the lightning. The air became colder, the metallic smell stronger, and I realized that the shadows weren't just following, they were pressing in, attempting to consume the room, to suffocate me with their presence. Then, in one blinding flash of lightning, I saw it clearly, a hand, impossibly thin, pressed against the window pane from the outside. At first I thought it was human, but the fingers were too long, too sharp, bending in ways that made my skin crawl. By the time the storm began to wane, I could barely tell where the house ended and the shadows began. Every sound, every flash of lightning, every movement in the corner of my vision was a threat. I was exhausted, trembling, soaked from the condensation and the sweat that poured from my body. But the fear was relentless. I couldn't distinguish reality from nightmare anymore. Every wall seemed to breathe, every shadow stretched toward me. Every reflection in the mirrors moved slightly differently than I did. I was no longer alone, I could feel it everywhere. I tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't budge. The furniture I had pushed against it barely held the presence back. It scratched and pressed, testing the barrier, and every second it seemed closer, heavier. The whispers returned, urgent, louder, threading through the floorboards, the walls, the ceiling. They were commands now, though I didn't understand the language. They were telling me I could not leave, that I belonged here, that I would remain. My body shook uncontrollably as I pressed my back to the door, trying to convince myself that the house was just old, that the shadows were just tricks of the storm. But I knew better. I stumbled toward the hallway, compelled to move, though every step felt like wading through thick tar. The floorboards moaned beneath me, a warning, or perhaps an announcement of my approach. The attic hatch creaked open on its own, a shadow moving in the darkness above. I couldn't look at it, couldn't bear to see whatever was waiting. And then I realized the handprints, the scratches, the glowing eyes they had followed me. Every surface of the house now bore marks of their presence, patterns, shapes, scratches, forming words I couldn't read, dripping with something that smelled like iron, like blood. I tried calling for help, dialing my phone over and over, but the screen was black, cracked, crawling with faint black veins that seemed to pulse like living things. I pressed my fingers against it, and it burned, tiny sparks flaring against my skin. The device was dead, but it wasn't powerless. It felt alive, connected to whatever had taken the house. I could hear its heartbeat through the silence, slow, deliberate, synchronized with my own terror. I fled back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me, hoping the barricade would hold for just a moment longer. The storm was fading, but the presence was undiminished, pressing, patient, waiting. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in near total darkness. I could hear scratching along the walls, crawling across the ceiling, moving under the floor, and then the reflection caught my eye. It wasn't me, not entirely. My own face stared back from the cracked mirror, but the eyes were wrong, darker, hollow, filled with something ancient, something cruel. The reflection moved independently, twitching its lips into a grin I hadn't made. I recoiled, stepping back, but the reflection followed, mimicking every movement with a grotesque delay. Panic surged, and I stumbled to the window, hoping to see the outside, hoping for escape. That's when I saw it, clear as day in the dim light of the storm-smeared sky. In the window's reflection, not the street or the trees but myself, inside the house, looking back at me, and behind me a shadow, taller than any human, featureless, pressing close, its presence consuming the room. I turned around, my body shaking, expecting to confront it, but the room was empty. The air was still, heavy, and silent, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I fled the house that morning, soaked and broken, never daring to look back. The streets were quiet, washed clean by the rain. The world seemed normal, and yet, when I glanced back over my shoulder one last time, I saw it my house calm and empty, but through the windows I could see movement. My own reflection stared at me, smiling, and behind it, the shadow raised its hand in a slow, deliberate wave, as if to say, "I've claimed it. I've claimed you." I ran until I couldn't see it anymore. But even now, days later, I can feel it, in the corners of my vision, in the shadows on my walls, in the mirror that reflects more than it should. It isn't gone. And I know, deep down, that it never will be. It's waiting, patient, for the next storm.